Stephen Reid, Flipping the Script, When Accessibility Becomes Your Primary Design Strategy, Camp. Gold sponsors, ANZ, Intopia and Telstra. Silver sponsors, Canva and Coles. Supporters, Rumour, the design recruiter.
Kia ora, thank you Sarah. Tēnā koutou. Hello everybody. My name's Stephen Reid, and it's great to be here at Camp. It's my first ever Camp, and it's a real privilege to be able to speak with you guys about a project that we've been really passionate about in our company. I'm founder and creative director of a creative agency in Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand called RAMP. And a core part of our business is to develop brand identities with our clients and for our clients. And those not familiar with brands, a brand identity is essentially the way that a business represents itself. It includes things like logos and look and feel and everything that comes together to create a unique look for a brand or for a business and a consistent look and feel to make it recognisable for everyone it needs to interact with. So I'm here to share with you today a brand development project that we undertook that changed everything for our business. It was by way of a process of the project itself, where we found ourselves in a situation where we had none of the normal building blocks that you would have to develop a brand. I'll take you through that shortly. And what we were left with, though, we needed to look for other places for consideration, for inspiration, and the result was actually a far better, a far stronger brand identity than we could ever have imagined for our client. A completely new way of working for us that we've taken throughout our whole business, and a wonder of why we had never worked like this before, ourselves and our industry. So we're on a bit of a mission to change that. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a word for disabled, and it doesn't mean disabled. Whaikaha. It means to be strong, to be determined. It's a word that's quietly begun to change the perceptions of a nation, and it all began with one man, Mātua Makatibu, visually impaired disability leader. He felt the word disability never really sat well with him at all, and in 2015, he decided to set about changing that. He was inspired by the words of Nelson Mandela. How can we turn disability into ability, disharmony to harmony, and disadvantage to advantage? In 2016, he coined the phrase tangata whaikaha. Tangata meaning people, whai means to achieve or to have, whaikaha means strength or determination. Little did he know that the word would become widely adopted across the disabled communities across Aotearoa. And this new way of seeing things, this new way of describing disability became the backdrop for an entirely new organisation to emerge, a new government ministry to emerge. This new government ministry in turn became the backdrop for an entirely new way for us to develop brand identities, flipping the script, when accessibility becomes your primary strategy. So our brief was to develop an interim brand identity for the world's first government ministry for disabled people, to become known as the Ministry of Disabled People. It was to be the first ministry in Aotearoa, New Zealand, established on the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, New Zealand's founding document. And it was to become the first ministry to have its name represented in 3 languages: Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, English, and New Zealand Sign Language. And this was our landscape. Country population of near on 5.5 million people, and our disabled communities make up roughly 24% of that. We had a whole bunch of considerations. Not least of all, we were relative newcomers to the whole idea of accessibility, let alone its practice. A key consideration, I actually just heard this in the previous panel discussion, nothing about us without us was given to us as a directive from the communities that we spoke with right from the outset. Clear directive. The principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, partnership, participation and protection would underpin everything that we did and how we went about it. The diversity of our underserved communities and their specific needs, not least of all, historically underserved communities, and specifically tangata whaikaha Māori, being Māori disabled people. But beyond the practical accessibility requirements, we faced deeper emotional barriers. Our communities had waited generations for recognition and had historically been unacknowledged. There was celebration about this new ministry, absolutely, but there was also a degree of suspicion. So the biggest barrier that we needed to overcome in the first instance was actually an emotive one, a real human barrier, and one that would need to be addressed not by what we produced, but in fact how we went about doing it. Now normally, brand development combines organisation strategy with audience needs. But this ministry was still being established while we were literally building the plane while we were flying it. We had no structure, we had no strategy, none of the usual building blocks. These things would come after the launch. This identity needed to be created before the launch. So we had to start elsewhere. We had to start at the other end of a normal process with our audience needs. So we set about understanding our audience needs and establishing what would make it easier for a community of such diverse needs to both want to engage and be able to engage with this brand. And having the right people was going to be really vital. So we established two key groups, a working group that would handle day-to-day strategy, design and project management, and our vital reference group wrapped around our working group. We met with our reference group regularly at times where before key milestones and at key milestones, and our reference group was made up of key people from various important parts of our audiences, including tangata Whaikaha Māori, disabled community leaders, and stakeholders. Our core team included strategy, design and bicultural expertise. It's myself, Helen Milner for strategy and creative, and Tim Worrell for Māori messaging and design lead. In order to break down emotive barriers, we began with messaging and creating a core message that would resonate with our communities and bring every aspect of this brand together, hold it together, be the foundation of this brand. The key reason for us being asked to work on this project was our expertise in developing brand identities that are able to bridge Māori and non-Māori worldviews in a really authentic way. They're also grounded in the principles of Te Tiriti, Waitangi. So our model has two key elements, the Tau Māori worldview and the non-Māori worldview. And the key thing is to bring these together in a way that respects each and enables each to come to life. And it's not about compromise, but it's about duality. And with each one of these worldviews coming together to be able to add to the whole. And the key point is this place of connection. We know it as he whitianga. It's this place of connection where messaging comes to life in both written and visual form, and it becomes the core message of our brand and is a reflection of a promise that our brand is making to its audiences. The wonderful thing about working alongside and within the Tau Māori worldview is that the Māori language has got this wonderful metaphoric way of working where it's multi-dimensional in its meanings. So you're taking creative leaps very early on in the whole process, and you're creating leaps that mean a whole lot of different things to a bunch of different people on a whole bunch of different levels. Unlike the English language, which is really quite literal, Māori, Te Reo Māori, is multi-dimensional. It's very rich. So we bring things to life first through words, and then we take another leap and we bring those words to life through visual means as well. And once we've done that, both of those elements are expressed everywhere the brand is seen. So even if we don't have words, the visual expression of that brand still lives everywhere the brand is seen. It's a very collaborative process. We work quite closely with our reference group at every step of the way. Here's Tim Worrell, our Māori design lead, to take you through the process and where we arrived. We got some sound there, please?
I have a particular connection to Te Ao Māori. For this project with Whaikaha, the inspiration that we landed on to create oral and visual expression that could work for their brand was the rata tree, a tree that starts its life as a vine that then, using the support of freestanding trees, grows up towards the sunlight, and eventually a network of vines will join together to create its own freestanding tree. Looking at using this metaphor, the rata for Whaikaha, I drew on whakatauki Māori, that's Māori proverbs, which talk in a symbolic, poetic way around the idea of rata, and that had a resonance with this project. First one was e kai whawhati no mai I te rau o te rata. Don't pick the blossoms of the rata, they're beautiful just as they are. Another whakatauki that I looked at was ko te rata te rākau I takahia e te moa. The plant, which has been shaped differently by the touch of the sacred moa, moa being the large flightless birds that were indigenous to Aotearoa. Inspired by the metaphor of the rata and by those traditional whakatauki, I composed a unique and new whakatauki for Whaikaha i ngā hihi o Tamanui te rā. Like the rata vines, growing together and flourishing, stand strong in the warmth of the sun. The next stage in the design process was to move from that whakatauki, that proverb, to a visual representation, visual hand we call a tohu, he tohu Māori, a Māori design. The inspiration that I ended up landing on and drawing on was some very common motifs that we use in whakairo, in our traditional carving, for surface design components, which are high, parallel lines that can twist and turn and insect. That insecting is called whakarare. These parallel lines are called high, which frame notched patterns, which are called pākati. And here you can see early explorations of how to use those and link them to the idea of rata vines growing around freestanding host entities. So you can see these vine-like forms growing. You can also see that we've added in there rata flowers representing the flourishing of those vines. And here's further development from that draft of that tohu and arriving at our tohu that we were happy and comfortable with and that we knew could be expressed in multiple ways and could provide a springboard for the next stages of development. Kia ora.
When we got to this point, the whole team could feel a shift. The project was coming to life in a way that involved and really listened to our audiences. They felt heard and they felt understood. Many tangata Whaikaha Māori especially had felt real resonance with this approach and a strong connection at this really early stage. At the beginning of the project, I mentioned there was a degree of suspicion about what this ministry could potentially become. But that was changing, and there was realisation that this new ministry that was actually meant to be supporting its communities to flourish was also, in fact, being supported by its communities to grow itself. And that began to create a really strong sense of community ownership right from the start. So with our tohu design, it was important. Our tohu design is a piece of design work that sits either as a primary piece of design work or can sit back as a background element, but it's always present. In order for it to always be present, it needed to be flexible. We made it able to cover a wide area by making it quite wide. We could also crop into it. It needed to work in different instances as well. And while all this was going on, we were also working on optimising the key brand elements for accessibility as well. Now, we're new to this space. We had just stepped into this, and a lot of this is learnings this is our journey of our learnings. So you might recognise a lot of these things as things that you're familiar with yourself. But this is all new to us as a journey. The first thing that we explored was colour, and the first area of colour that we explored was colour blindness. And the colour consistency across all types of colour blindness was really important to us. It's a big consideration. Colour consistency and branding is really a really important consideration. This new dimension for us of colour blindness really shone a light on a blind spot that we had. It wasn't just the consistency of colour. We wanted to be mindful that when we started to put colours together, that the contrast levels were going to be the same for everybody as well. So we explored a whole bunch of different colour types. For example, this type of colour range shifted dramatically through the different levels of colour blindness. And we realised pretty quickly that bright colours were going to become a bit of a problem. It wasn't until we started to look at more earthy tones that the colours started to become a bit more consistent through each level of colour blindness. And we arrived at this as our primary colour palette. It's a combination that provides the contrast we're after for the diversity of application that we needed, and the combination of strength and brightness as well that would reflect our core message. We also looked at typography, and typography is going to be a really important aspect of the brand for two reasons. The first being it needed to be a conduit for accessibility, for readability. The second, it also, because of its visual nature, also needed to be an extension of the visual identity itself. It needed to feel as though it belonged. So we explored some of the world's most readable typefaces. And we looked at special characteristics of typefaces, the heights, the consistency of heights of the letter forms and the depth of the letter forms, as well as the open spaces between the letter forms and the characters themselves. And we arrived at Roboto Sans as our core identity typeface, and Roboto Serif as the heading typeface. So our elements were starting to come together. We had our message through our whakatoki, we had our message through our tohu design, we had our colour palette, and we had our fonts. But we still didn't yet have a logo, or a name for that matter. Normally you'd have those things well in place before you do any of this work. So we went to our whakatoki because we wanted to honour our whakatoki as well as our tohu design through our logo design. And it was the messaging around flourishing, growing together to stand strong in the warmth of the sun that we brought to life through the logo design. Two elements, sets of high patterns, growing together, supporting one another, the ministry and the communities standing strong in the warmth of the sun. And while this work was going on, the ministry was working hard on the most appropriate name. It was Matua Makatibble who suggested Whaikaha and gifted it to the new ministry. So our new ministry's logo was nearly complete. Nearly. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have two official languages, Te Reo Māori and New Zealand Sign Language. Curiously, not English. An important aspect of this brand identity, though, was to incorporate both of these languages as well as English, making it the first ministry to have its name represented in all three languages. Now complete, the New Zealand Sign Language name can be accessed through the QR code. When you scan it, New Zealand's Whaikaha's sign name represents the elements of the rata tree growing tall. So then we started to expand the visual identity. We started to look at photography. An important aspect for photography for us in this entire visual identity was that it needed to be authentic as well. We only work with people from our communities, not models. We started to apply the visual identity to things like signage, the signage system, internal signage system with Braille as well. We applied the identity to a bunch of resources for the ministry, as well as to community engagement programs, internal posters, and of course the Whaikaha website. It's aiming to be the gold standard in accessibility for New Zealand government websites. Every aspect of the site has been optimised for accessibility. And to wrap everything up, the visual guidelines provide background as well as guidance to the application of the identity. So this project fundamentally shifted how we as a business create brands for our clients, and was quite instrumental in developing our proprietary model for strategy and creative that we refer to as inclusive creativity. The learnings were simple but significant, and while they were learned through a brand development project, I do believe that they can actually be applied to any project that is aiming to enable more people. The first of those learnings was the simple change in process made a big change to the outcome. By looking at the barriers that an audience or a community may face as our first step, rather than as an afterthought, we're able to immediately create more relevant and accessible work. But you need to involve your audiences to do that. Nothing about us without us. Provided with this, we still would have gone into this kind of space, but not so deliberately. This directive was responsible for a lot of the outcome that we finally arrived at. And underpinning this, the partnership, participation and protection principles guided us the whole way. All of these are very universal, human-centric principles that can be applied to any project, and they're fundamental themes that emerged for us very early on, and we wondered why we hadn't used any of these or gone into this space in the past. So the Whaikaha identity for us is much more than a logo. It's a message, and it's a promise, and the processes that are wrapped around it mark the beginning of a journey of understanding the power and the necessity of accessibility in all of its forms, reshaping our business, how we think about the opportunities and the obligations that brands have, and why we do what we do. It represents a willingness to come together, to listen, to accept and appreciate our unique qualities, so that together we can help create a world where we can all thrive. Kia ora, thank you.
Ali Camp, celebrating 10 years.